Alright, spoilers for School Life. Last warning, this series is really good, and the first episode hits different if you don't know what's happening. You've been thoroughly warned. Miki was the character that made me the most sad the first time I watched this series. Her story with Kei is still a very tragic one, but the second time around I understood it a lot better. This story has a lot of twists, and being able to see those twists coming makes the story have a different feel. Ever watch one of those videos where they tell you to watch something again because you'll spot new things that you didn't know, or now that you know the twist? It's like that. Miki's story wasn't as impacted as some of those others, but knowing that Kei got infected after she left hits hard. Miki and all her aura is a really fun character to analyze, and that's what we're going to be doing today. First, I'll go over her relationship with Kei, then how the room that in the time they spent inside impacted her. After that, I'll describe how she learned her lesson really fast but still had some room to grow. And lastly, I'll discuss Yuki's role in Miki's life and how it was Yuki that helped Miki not lose herself. Alright, let's go. Miki had a deep admiration for her friend Kei, and we even see later that it's a part of why she grew to care so much for Yuki. I think the tragedy of their friendship is the difference in priorities. I mentioned in my Yuki video that I created a spectrum for the main theme of the story. The main theme is that in life you have to accept hard truths so that you don't die, and you have to find joy so that you don't fall into despair and die. Miki at the beginning of the story was on the truth side of the spectrum, and Kei was on the joy side. That dichotomy is what led to Kei leaving and Miki learning an even harder truth about survival. There is a lot of evidence that shows that this is the way they both were thinking, and I found it extremely cool to notice on my second watch. During their trip to the mall, Miki is reading a book. Not just any book, but the original book that she's already read, but not in her language. I found this to be super interesting because she wants to read the original even though she already experienced the story. She wants to understand the true nature of the story, and reading it as it was originally written was extremely important to her. She values the truth even if it's not really that necessary. Kei, on the other hand, had her player. This was telling because of the conversation they had about it. When Miki asked her why she was listening to music on the player, Kei told her it was because she liked the way that it sounded. It had a unique feel, but the idea is that the way it was played was what was bringing her the most joy, not the true nature of the song. The truth is that a more modern player would have played the song most similarly to how it was originally produced, which is why Miki asked, but Kei doesn't care as much about the true version of the song, just if she enjoys the way she's listening to it. To put it bluntly, they're talking about life and how they both prioritize things in it. Miki prioritizes living in its true form, and she doesn't care how she lives, as long as it's the truth. Kei prioritizes living the way she wants to live, and life itself isn't the thing she cares most about. This culminates in what happened in the room. Miki was fine accepting a version of reality where she was alive. Things weren't great, but at least she had a friend. Kei couldn't stand the way they were living, so she risked her life to find a way to live the way she wanted. Miki stayed because she cared more about living than about how she lived, and that's why she stayed. Miki wasn't going to live a lie and get herself killed. Kei wasn't ever going to stay because she couldn't stand to live in misery. Kei being on the joy side is what got her killed because she couldn't face the truth that living was more important. If she had stayed and waited for the others, then she would have likely survived with all of them together, but she didn't make that choice. In the next section, I will talk about how Miki being the opposite end of the spectrum led to her near death as well, because she was... Kei leaving wasn't really the last straw, it was Teromaru leaving. She was truly alone after that happened, and we saw next the flip side of the theme. She fell into despair. She had no hope, and after a while she grew desperate. She started trying to let herself out at any moment, and she did it out of desperation. If the others hadn't arrived, Miki would have opened the door to a zombie and gotten eaten. The other side to the theme is that without a reason to live, without any joy in life, a person does crazy things. When a person can't accept the truth, they go into a world blind, and a person who has fallen into despair will sprint into something dangerous out of desperation or lose the will to live altogether. When she felt truly alone, she felt as though she had nothing, and she remembered that Kay had said before she left. Kay told her that she didn't understand that they weren't happy. Miki's response was that she did know, and what she didn't say is that she was fine with it as long as they were together. Although Miki didn't prioritize joy or hope, she still had it when Kay was around. Kay was Miki's hope. Kay was the thing that stopped Miki from being totally alone and who helped her deal with hard truths. When she left and then Toromaru left, she had no joy in her life. When she hears the others, she leaps into action. Kay had asked her to watch her player, and I found that interesting. I think that Kay cared about Miki and didn't want Miki to suffer with nothing to do and nothing to remember her by. I also think that Kay was trying to get Miki to see things the way she saw them by leaving her the player. It's the thing that Miki never really seemed to understand, much like how their situation with the room was. Miki left the isolated room, and she got saved, but her story was far from over. The school life club took her in, and she adapted pretty fast, all things considered. Miki had been all about the truth, but this was the point in her story where desperation drove her to seek joy. She had a deep respect for Yuki, but she still chose to lie to her in the end, and I'll talk about it in the next section. There's a part I want to bring up here. She had a conversation with Ri in the showers, and it was about how she wanted to be a part of the school life club. Miki had been fighting Ri on the ethics and logic behind leaving Yuki in her state, but this was Miki's surrender. In early episodes that Miki was the least comfortable with leaving Yuki in the state that she was in, and it's here that she relents on that for the first time. When I watched this series again, I thought it was weird that Miki seemed to have this growing discomfort with the idea of Yuki being lied to, but then I realized that it wasn't really the problem with Miki. She cared about the truth, but she also had learned to care about joy. She was closer to the middle than any other character by that point, except maybe Kurumi. I thought that it was weird, but now I understand why she was making the choices that she was. She was afraid to end up back in that room, she was afraid to be alone. Miki knows that others bring her joy and that being alone will make her more miserable. So she learns to adapt and to see the good in the situation she's in. She becomes an official club member and starts to lie to Yuki. Her time in the school life club was truly special to her, and there's so much to talk about there. Like Toromaru. She felt deeply saddened and rejected when he stopped liking her and took it very personally, and it's clear to see why. She didn't have the deepest bond with him or anything, but when she had no one else, she had him, but when she held him too tightly, he ran away. During the worst moment of her life, when she had just lost someone, he ran away from her and left her all alone. I discussed something similar in my Taiga video, and what hurts so much about it is the feeling of isolation. It's different from having one or two people care. Like they say in Blue Lock, making a 1 a 0 is a huge difference. I know technically said it backwards, but the point is the same. Having 0 anyone and having 1 somebody are completely different. By the way, if you're enjoying this, please like and subscribe. It's the desperation that led her to compromising on what she believed she should do. Miki's relationship with Ri should also not be understated. Miki doesn't seem to care about Kurumi individually all that much, which is strange, but Miki gravitates towards Ri. Miki trusts Ri very quickly, and Ri is often the one that she goes to when she's worried. I also think that's part of why Miki does what Ri says, even when she disagrees. I think that it's possible Ri's authority makes Miki feel more comfortable, since she feels like when she talks to Ri, she's being heard by a voice that matters, which is super important in our next section, which is about... Ri and Miki have a really interesting dynamic. Their conflict over Yuki is the main crux of the story, and most of the conflict revolves around them. So when Miki told Ri about her concerns, she wrote it off, and even said that Yuki had Megane watching out for her, which hits way different when you find out that they can't see Megane. Ri basically said, it's fine, her delusions will keep her safe. Nope, not a good idea. Miki felt as if her concerns weren't being heard, which is why she kept gradually bringing it up. That means a lot more when you remember that she is doing this stuff and allows this stuff to take place because she's deathly afraid of being alone, and she's risking that for Yuki's safety. Ria writes it off because of her own issues, but when Miki brings it up the next time, things change. When she brings it up after Yuki goes through it, Kurumi and Ri seem a lot more convinced, and I'll discuss this the most in my Ri video, but this was an important step in her growth. Once Miki brought it up and felt heard, she pretty much let it go, which was kind of funny, but also not very helpful. Miki was the next person to stop Yuki from accepting reality, at least she tries to be. Now that her concerns are addressed, she trusts Ri will take care of it, but when Ri tries to take care of it, Miki thinks that it's weird and undermines her. It seemed to me like Miki wasn't paying enough attention to what resulted from her actions. What she said and what she said a little later really impacted Ri, and how Ri viewed the situation with Yuki. During a game they all played, it showed how they were both processing and specifically showed a lot of Miki's thought processes. The game was simple. What would your life look like if the outbreak hadn't happened? Easy. I guess it's more about how you would want your life to work out, my bad, but Yuki only understood half the rules, and Kurumi was the only one who answered the question correctly with that context. Ri chose not to answer because she was processing the idea of lying about things in front of Yuki. Miki's answer was that she wasn't sure, and I think that speaks to two levels of tragedy. One is that she actually knows that it's pointless and she can't even imagine because the world that already exists is so foreign to that idea. And the second is that it's even sadder than that first one. Miki hadn't been able to figure out what she wanted to do with her future while the world was still intact, and now she'll never get the chance to even try those things and open her horizons. She is still unsure because the world she knew ended before she could explore it enough to find an answer. That's very tragic, and that does remind me of someone. I'm super ready, and I have the most to say in this section. When Yuki went about half delusional to save Miki's life, Miki had a deep respect for her. Her respect for Yuki was a very important aspect of her character for the majority of the story. That also ties in with the revelation that Megane, which I call the delusions, by the way, just in case you kind of mix those up, since I said that like 10 minutes ago, is something that is entirely in Yuki's head. Also, that Miss Sakura was an actual person, and Miki finds out way later that it's more connected than she thinks. Seeing the person who saved her acting all delusional and talking to things that aren't there must have been both scary and heartbreaking. I think she was worried because of the obvious, of what the heck are you talking about, don't kill me, and also the fact that someone who she already cares about is suffering. They slept leaning on each other in the back of the car on the way there. Miki totally trusted Yuki and cared about her super quickly. The saddest part of this is that Yuki doesn't seem to understand how much this is hurting Miki. This reminds me of that thing she does where she sobs her eyes out when someone is going through something. Yuki felt like she needed Miki to acknowledge Megane or she was gonna lose it. I think that this incident is what also led to Yuki starting to signal to the others when Megane appears so that they won't ignore her. If you see it that way, then this incident was actually really good for Yuki, but Miki, not so much. Miki was very freaked out by this, and she brought it up to the others. Ri was still dependent on Yuki's delusion, so she came up with counters. Some were pretty good ones too, like how they didn't have the ability to help Yuki, but Miki still didn't want to have to make someone she cared about live a lie. It wasn't until Kurumi showed Miki a way to view the situation as a way to gain joy and still respect Yuki that Miki became a little less resistant. That did change as time went on. When Miki had to confront the truth and what it really looked like in regards to Yuki, she started to question things a lot more. In episode 1, Miki is really going through it. She clearly has some growing pains when it comes to playing along with Yuki's delusions, but also it's because of how much she cares about Yuki. Yuki was running around and nearly getting hurt that whole episode. Running around and jumping onto things covered in broken glass and infected blood is not good for you, and Miki was definitely stressed. The next time she brings it up to Ri, after Yuki tells the group that she nearly left school, but Megane stopped her. I think that this was Yuki's cry for help and that she needed to be watched more closely. Miki saw that Yuki's illusions were a real danger and addressed it to the one person she always did, and it got written off, as it always does, and she got upset. That's because the true care she had for Yuki, and seeing her not be treated as well as she needed to wouldn't let her rest. Miki cared deeply for Yuki, and a huge part of that is because she reminds her of Kei. Kei and Yuki were on the same side of the theme spectrum at this point in the story. So when Yuki was reading that poem about stagnation, it meant a lot to Miki. Miki later quoted in that episode, or at least the work that her friend liked. Yuki was reading that poem, and the same poem meant a lot to Kei. I think the reason why is because of their similar personalities. They both strive for joy and new experiences. I also appreciated that Miki and Yuki were able to bond over this work. Miki likes reading and literature, but Yuki doesn't usually seem to have an interest in those things, but them bonding over this work was special and is one of my favorite moments in the whole series. It's not just Miki that cared for Yuki, but the other way around too. Yuki cared a lot about Miki, and she could see that. When things were going down, Yuki put everything aside to make sure that Miki was safe. Geez, their names sound similar, but when Miki felt like she was back in that room, back in that despair, she felt hopeless and like no one was going to save her. The events that preceded that one are what caused her to feel that way. Oftentimes, it's a great loss that triggers the most despair, so when she lost Toromaru, when he got infected, she started to feel hopeless. She tried to be brave and strong like Kurumi, but she realized how strong Kurumi really was. She was fighting to save her friend, and when she got stuck, she felt despair. She said things like she had her chance to get out, but she didn't, and that her fate was to always end up back in that room all alone. She felt like all the happiness she found later was for nothing, just delaying her inevitable fate. Yuki saved her from that despair again. Yuki got all the zombies to go home, and that let Miki be free once again and saved almost everyone. Anyways, when Miki is telling Ri about the ending to her book, it hits really hard when you know that this story ends the same way. It was foreshadowing the biggest loss to come and the one that will always make her sad. She describes how in the first version she read, the dog dies and the group goes on without it. And when she read it in the original language, she was hoping that it would be different. To me, this reads as Miki having learned to live for joy, but still going too far in the other direction from how she started. Now she wants a version of the story where they get a happy, perfect ending, and she learns later that it's wrong to think that way. The ending to the book foreshadowed the ending to the series, and I find that very interesting. When Miki watches Toromaru die in her lap, she's devastated. She doesn't really cry, though. Instead, she thinks that he would want her to stay happy. We can see that Miki had started to hallucinate him, but Yuki stops her and tells her that he was grateful to her in his last moments. Yuki reminds her of last words and how, when she was delusional, she couldn't remember the last words that Miss Sakura left for her. So it's important to remember the sad things, so that you can live right by the person you lost. After she hears that, Miki starts to cry, and the hallucination disappears. Miki also cries during the graduation speeches, but who wasn't crying during the graduation speeches? There was one more moment that really made her sad, and it's at the very end. When she sees Kei again, and she sees what happened to her, it's truly tragic. Her friend is gone, and she's never coming back. I also found it beautiful that Miki repeated words from Yuki's speech back to her when she saw this. Kids really do love school. At least Miki knows the truth and won't spend her time wondering. And now she even has the skill to choose to find happiness in her life. Good for her. Miki's story is a very powerful one. The first time I watched this series, it made me cry. And it was actually the only thing that made me sob like crazy. And the reason why is because it just really hits hard. There's this deep sense of tragedy and sadness in her story. She cared about someone so deeply, but their own flaws got in the way of them being able to live. And that's a truly tragic way for such a young character to go out. And more than that, the character we know is the one who has to live with that loss. And I find that extremely tragic too. I found her story so beautiful because it's about the theme completely. It's about how when you go through hard things, sometimes when you get out of them, things are a lot easier for you, or they're easier to digest. I found it really beautiful that after she was no longer in that room, whenever she would eat, everything she tasted was amazing. Every piece of food that was warm, everything she got to experience was so much better. She learned to appreciate the little things, and that's something that loss can teach you. It's extremely sad, but it's also beautiful in a way. It reminds us all, or at least reminds me, that when you go through something, or something horrible even, it can be a reminder that when it's over, or when you get through it, life is going to seem a lot better. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you liked it, and I really enjoyed making it. This was very sad, of course, but I also find this story extremely beautiful for what it says about those tragic moments. So, thank you for watching.